So this is my kind of breakdown of how I went about doing Wwise integration with the Unity survival shooter tutorial project. So this is just a quick example of my Wwise project. I have interactive music here that I'll jump into first, but I also have all of the enemies. I have sounds for them, for their death, footsteps, hits, for the gunshots from the player, the death, their footsteps, their hits as well. So I have tons and tons of random containers and little automations within each individual event. But on the music side, I wanted to not focus as much on the composition, but focus on just how would I implement a dynamic music system. And I'm using two sets of switches. The first one is the kind of kill count, switching and progressing the song forward. So I have a script called kill count tracker that takes the score, and for every couple of kills it'll advance and set the switch to be a new part of the music. So back here I have the intro, build to main, which is this kind of transition thing, main and then main plus more. The intro is kind of just a super simple glockenspiel xylophony kind of sound. It's a little ominous and Halloweeny. But then what it'll do is once the player gets 10 kills, it will advance and set the switch to move on to the build switch, and then build to main after 18 kills and 25 for the main, and then 50 for the main plus more. And then as well, when the player dies, it'll switch the player status to dead. So what that does is, so if we go into main, which is this really kind of ridiculous heavy metal thing, and then the player dies, it'll switch in the next bar to this kind of holdout. So as you die, it'll fade the screen to black and then have this lasting chord. And so I went in and I built the script from scratch, basically. I used a couple of things from the other scripts in the game, but like in terms of figuring out the conditional statements and how I would, be able to track, each individual kill. That was something that I kind of built for myself, as well as for footsteps. So in player footsteps, I had to figure out how to trigger footsteps because you couldn't just trigger it on a certain interval. I wanted to lock it to the animator itself. So I went into the animation controller, and then here on the bottom right, you can kind of see there's the walk cycle. And so what I did is I figured out that you could put these events on an animation, and then it will trigger a function within a script that's attached to that same prefab. So I have an event here at this frame 15, and then again at frame 24, that will send a player footfall trigger to a script, which I built here. And this basically says that if it, hits this trigger, it'll execute this function, which will play the post event or the footsteps, which is a random container that has 5 different footsteps in that, which I did different variations of. Just trying to make it not sound overly repetitive, but also not sound so different that you can kind of notice it too much. I also have a little bit of pitch automation or randomization as well. As well as I really appreciate having this within Wwise, that you can kind of bring up the high pass, because in the game itself, I'm like, wow, those footsteps are really overly bassy, so I could just bring up the high pass a little bit and kind of fix that. One of the other things I did as well with the player hits is I have two different elements playing at the same time here for the player hit. There's the voice itself that I'm pitch shifting just a little bit, just plus 100, minus 100, and then the hit itself that I'm automating or randoming a little bit more, because the voice, when it went up and down too much, sounded kind of goofy. But the punches themselves don't sound as ridiculous. I did the same thing for the mixer as well, for the death. And then gunshots, I did a random container as well with a bit of automation and some low pass as well to make them a little heavier sounding. So I have little gunshot samples that I combined a couple of different versions of gunshots and did some EQing and stuff like that to make those sound that way. And then with Zombear, I took some sounds of bears, sped them up quite a bit. I could probably just play, actually no, the part of the hit as well. There's like a punching sound for an impact, so you can kind of tell from when you're shooting regular. And then when you have this kind of bassier impact that is attached to the hit of each individual creature. Same with the elephant. I did the hits. And then the death is a more sustained sound. That'll have a little bit of pitch randomization as well. So I didn't get like super duper duper ridiculous deep into Wwise, but I feel like I might have needed a more complicated project to do that. And so I'd like to do that in the future, but for right now, this was good for me to kind of stop just doing standard tutorial stuff and like come up with original ideas. Like, okay, I want to do a dynamic music system. How do I do that? I want to attach all of these scripts to walking animations. How do I do that? As well as working with switches and things like that as well within Unity and Wwise. And so it was really, really fun, really challenging to work on. I did way more scripting than I ever thought I would do. I ended up having to split up every single enemy script because they only had one for all 3 enemies, but I had to split those off and change those in order to be able to implement individual sounds per enemy. So it was a lot of work, but definitely worth it. And